One, Chair, we are live.
Welcome everyone to the Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025 meeting of the Police Accountability Board. Public notice: to access the meeting remotely, join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using this URL in the packet. If you do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, use the drop-down menu and click on rename to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by phone, dial 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 891-7458-9069. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, press *9 and wait to be recognized. Land acknowledgement. The city of Berkeley recognizes that the community we live in was built on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the ancestors and descendants of the sovereign Berna Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to all the Ohlone tribes and descendants of the Berna Band. As we begin our meeting tonight, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of Berkeley, the documented 5,000-year history of a vibrant community at the West Berkeley Shellmans, and the Ohlone people who continue to reside in the East Bay. We recognize that Berkeley's residents have and continue to benefit from the use and occupation of this unceded stolen land since the city of Berkeley's incorporation in 1878. As stewards of the laws regulating the city of Berkeley, it is not only vital that we recognize the history of this land, but also recognize that the Ohlone people are present members of Berkeley and other East Bay communities today. With that, we'll go to the agenda and item 1, roll call.
Thank you, Chair Cayetano. I'm now proceeding with roll call. Chair Cayetano.
Here.
Vice Chair Wilson.
Here.
Board Member Calavita.
Here.
Board Member Leftwich.
Here.
Board Member Wells is currently absent. And then welcome to our newest board member, Board Member Edmonds. Here. Okay. On behalf of the ODPA, we have Director Aguilar, who will be joining us in a few minutes. We have data analyst Irene Levine. We have our investigator Jason Wechter, myself, policy and Susan Leo. On behalf of the DPD, we have OSP manager Arlen Malberg and Lieutenant Bonaventure joining us today. And we don't have any of our colleagues from the city manager's office joining us today. Let me just confirm. And that's correct. And Chair, with that, we have one.
Great, thanks, Jose. All right, moving on to agenda item 2, administering the oath of office and confidentiality to new board member Edmonds. Welcome. Thank you.
So it's usually the director's role, but Chair Cayetano, just in time.
Hello, we're going to swear.
Yeah.
You want to pull it up or?
Yeah. You want? I have it up in just a moment.
Did I stand or?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I would say if you want to actually swear me in, I'm having technical issues, so I don't want to disrupt the process.
Perfect. So please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Michelle Edmonds, do solemnly swear.
I, Michelle Edmonds, do solemnly swear
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California
Against all enemies,
against all enemies,
foreign and domestic.
foreign and domestic,
That I will bear true faith
that I will bear true faith
and allegiance to the Constitution
and allegiance to the Constitution
of the United States.
of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California.
That I take this obligation freely,
And I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion.
or purpose of evasion,
And that I will well
and that I will well
and faithfully discharge
and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which
the duties upon which
I am about to enter.
I'm about to enter.
I further swear
I further swear
that I will abide by
that I will abide by
and maintain confidentiality
and maintain confidentiality
of the personnel files of sworn employees
of the personnel files of sworn employees
of the police department
of the police department
and all other matters
and all other matters
that are confidential under state and federal law.
that are confidential under state and federal law.
Congratulations.
Great, welcome, board member Edmonds. I think we. Do new board members usually speak or no?
If you'd like to. yes.
Oh, yeah. Please, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah. Certainly, yeah. Hi, everyone. So yeah, my full name is Shadia Edmonds. I also go by Chop, so feel free to say Chop, but, I'm really, delighted to be here. I was really looking for a way to, to work with and serve the community. And this is, I think, a fantastic opportunity. So yeah, really excited about the opportunity and look forward to learning from all my colleagues and being of in service I can.
Welcome.
Welcome. Okay. Agenda item 3, approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes to the current agenda?
I'll move to approve. A second.
Are there any objections to the motion to approve the agenda? Seeing and hearing none, the motion is carried.
Okay, next item. Item 4, public comment.
I have one moment. Okay. So, welcome to our public comment section. Speakers are generally allotted up to 3 minutes, but may be allotted less time. If there are many speakers, they may comment on any matter within the board's jurisdiction at this time, except confidential personnel matters. I will start with those physically present before going on to our virtual. With that said, is there any public comment?
Help yourself, But you can.
Can you hear me if I stand here?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. And I want to thank you. Commission. The job of a police officer is not easy. And there's great risk. And I remember ever since forever, the motto is to serve and protect. And I also can report that sometimes that's not the case. And everyone, including all the police officers, deserve respect and consideration. I'm a Berkeley resident and on 2 Berkeley City Commissions, one of which pays close attention to the activities of the police. So again, this isn't about blame or shame or punishment. This is about really requesting more communication, more coordination, more interfacing with the public. Because being in both places on the city commissions and in the community, there isn't enough of that. And there's a lot of concern with so many, especially elders, and traumatized, and perhaps not physically, mentally, emotionally well, challenged people. There's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. And I really want to encourage us again to step back a bit. Remember, we're here to serve and protect and care about each other. And if we stop and look and listen, we might be able to help rather than hurt. And I had a recent experience where some hurt when I needed help. I fell out of my truck and it was bleeding profusely. So I wasn't trying to create a problem, I needed help. And it's like, so don't hurt me, please. And it's like, why should that be a concern? Why should so many of the people in the community not want to call the police? Or call for medical help? Because they keep getting re-traumatized. So I appreciate my conversation with this good gentleman. I'm concerned about not being able to say double L's correctly. So this good gentleman, all right. you know, I really know we can do better if we remember we're all in this together, and if we don't. No, I don't even want to go there because I'm such an old hippie. You know, I really want to be about this rather than what it could be. And it's already getting really hot and angry. On both sides, but there's two good sides. So thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry I have to go. I have another meeting to go to, but I really want to thank you and request that there is accountability.
Thanks for your public comment. Appreciate it.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you.
And do we have any additional public comment from those physically present before we move on to our virtual attendees? Okay, with that said, I'll now proceed to our virtual attendees. We have one hand raised at the moment. Kit Saganor, you have been granted permission to speak. 3 minutes are on.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't be there in person this evening. I really appreciate the fact that you're looking into the mutual aid agreements and some of the other agreements. It was moving to hear someone being sworn in, and your new member, welcome, being sworn in to office this evening and swearing to uphold the Constitution. We now have folks in the federal government who are not upholding the Constitution. So this was liable at some point or other to put Berkeley in a difficult position. So clarifying how Berkeley police officers will interact with federal agents, I think is a very important thing to be doing. Thank you very much.
At this time, if you'd like to provide a public comment and are attending virtually, now is the time. Again, raise hand icon or star nine. Chair, at this time, we see no additional hand raised.
Thanks, Jose. Okay. Agenda item 5, approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any minutes they want to fix the minutes?
I move that the minutes be approved.
A second.
Are there any objections to the motion to approve the minutes for the regular meeting of April 9th, 2025? Seeing or hearing none, the motion is carried.
Okay. Item 6, audit staff report, director.
Thank you, Chair, board members, colleagues, and committee members. First of all, congratulations, board member Edmonds. Sorry, I had technical glitches on this end. I didn't have the whole readily available, but I appreciate you coming out tonight and we're eager to have you be part of our team. I have a few updates for the board and community. The annual report has been reported out that we're finalizing it. We received one last piece of information from the police department and one feature that, again, I'll reiterate that we didn't do last iteration of the report, the annual report that we called it. We did do the analysis for the training that the police officer underwent, so we had one request pending from the department, we have not received it, and we're just doing one final review before we get it to the vice chair. But it was originally contemplated to be to you 2 meetings ago, so we're just providing an update and transparency here. I wanted to provide some other updates. There was a off-agenda memo published by the city manager's office. And I don't know if Mr. Murillo, if we have somebody from the city manager's office present with us, but I can summarize the memo. I had just done initial review of it, but the essence of that off-agenda memo is that the city will be transitioning the special application unit team to the county's behavioral services team. And that's contemplated to take, if you can, get the memo, it is contemplated and we'll include in the minutes, but it's, scheduled to take place, the transition within this summer. So it seems like it's something that they are underway. There is a rationale, explanation in there. There is, information about why they made that decision. And for, additional context, a few months back, at the end of last year, a community member came by the board to present a, policy review associated with specialized care units. So this is a significant development that would, impact our review and analysis and any recommendations we have for the body, out of that review, which is underway. Again, we'll include it in the, we'll circulate it for the board, but it is available already online in the off agenda memo webpage of the city. And it's, titled Specialized Care Unit, it's from April 22nd. Just providing the board and community, few, staffing changes, our investigator, Jason Weber, has notified us that he'll be, transitioning now. So, this is last meeting. Next, week, he'll be wrapping up his services with us. Just want to say, Jason, I'm very grateful for, your service to us. You came in, I hit the ground running. It was more of a matter of telling you where to find things than really telling you, how to do investigations. We appreciate your expertise and the knowledge brought, before us. I'll allow you to say any remarks, to one or your NACO news updates, or if you want to say it now, I don't know if you have it.
I'll look with the NACO news update. I'll be working on some other oversight related projects, primarily with NACO, National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, on whose board I serve. And they have some upcoming events. On Friday at 1 p.m., they have a webinar on understanding civilian oversight's fast-changing legal landscape, presented by Professor Cheryl Berkeley, who teaches at the University of Chicago Law School, who was the chief administrator of the Independent Police Review Authority in Chicago, and was also responsible for creating and building Chicago's Civilian Office of Police Accountability. And she lectures and writes about law enforcement use of force and civilian oversight of the police reform strategies. So she's an outstanding speaker. The deadline to register is tomorrow at, I think, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And so Director Aguilar can get you the link for that if you, actually, I think you're invited to come view it here if you wish. And there will be no webinar in May. There usually are webinars monthly, but in June 12th, there will be a webinar on the new world of artificial intelligence, opportunities for police oversight practitioners, and registration information about that will be posted on the NACO website soon. And then on the third Thursday of every month, you're invited to join the NACO Investigators Forum that I host. It's a forum for oversight investigators and really anyone involved in oversight to share information about resources, training, technology, online tools, etc. Have open conversations where you can seek advice, discuss challenges, frustrations, and successes, and meet network professional colleagues around the United States. And that is also in the NACO website.
Thanks, Sheldon.
Thank you for the opportunity to work here. It's been a pleasure, and I can say it's been a little boring because Berkeley police, compared to other jurisdictions where I work, generate far fewer and far less serious complaints. And so I'm impressed with the professionalism of the officers I've seen, and with their patience and compassion and understanding. So it's been a fun experience.
Thank you, Jason. Some more updates, and staff and related. You may have, tuned in to a recent article by the Berkeley side, that the city manager instituted a hiring freeze, that was effective as of, last Friday. Just want to reiterate that because we're in an independent authority under charter, that hiring freeze doesn't impact us. So we are still underway with our selection of the vacancies we have in the department. I have not, received, any additional, notification, but it is, I have spoken with the, city manager that hiring freeze is directly for, the departments under his purview, not the independent charter offices. In some of the items, updates are on the agenda, the downtown task force, did receive, a review by council, and I know we're gonna talk about that, so I won't get ahead of that. But I will say, just as a general statement, that some of the issues that we're facing as an oversight community and, to the extent that it's helpful or not, they are broader issues in the landscape. We often, during the NAPO listserv, we hear about some of the setbacks in the oversight community, so, we're not alone in that sense. I don't know if that's encouraging or not, but I do want to say that I was proud of the work that we did, and again, I don't want to get ahead of that conversation, but I just wanted to make that remark there. In the NAPO training, we're always going to open our doors for our board members if you want to tune in and train with us, and we're also inviting community members. We can do it right here in this conference room where we stream out. If you're interested, and you hear that there's a webinar coming up, feel free to stop by the office and you can train with us and do that webinar. I will stop it there. Sorry, did we have any city managers, office representatives?
No.
Okay, but if there's any questions, and we'll take it now, Chair.
Questions?
I don't know about a question, but an announcement regarding the transition or transfer of the SCU program to the county is quite significant, with big implications. I look forward to reading the letter and maybe ask that be put on an agenda.
Yeah. And on a respectful note there, I'll make the comment that I made, sent out to the city manager's office. We have respectfully requested that matters of that significance and related to our work that we're being included as our stakeholders. If we're not tuning in to the off agenda memos, we could miss stuff, and so I resurfaced that request, so hopefully we can have that simultaneous notification. Because I did indicate, like you said, it's directly related to what we're doing here. We did receive a policy review request on that, so it's actually underway and it's gonna impact this.
Any other questions? Okay, without any other questions, we'll go to agenda item 7, chair and board members' reports. I guess first I would like to say thank you to Jason Wechter for his service to the Berkeley community, to this board. It's been really great pleasure to have you here and to see how thorough your work is for the community and your commitment to police oversight. It's really inspiring, and the fact that you're doing this and serving on Naples board at the same time, it means that we have a lot of good experience and wisdom coming from the director's office that is now leaving us. So we're sad that you're going, but understand why. So thank you so much for being here. Other chair report is that we now have 6 board members, as you can see. I believe that we're capped at 9. Is that right?
Yes.
And so I'm pushing to have us at full capacity by June. So 3 more board members. And that would really fill out this table, but I think it's a goal of mine to have 9 by June. So we'll see what the council does, and I'm reaching out to them intermittently to request that. So that's my update. Any other board member updates, personal or otherwise?
So we have 7, right? So we need 2 more.
Because of the board members only. Sure.
But we don't replace.
We did reach out to the council member's office. We haven't gotten a response yet, but we'll follow up.
Yeah, it's an open question. What board member Williams' status is. I see. Yeah. Okay. No other updates from the board members? Okay. Great, we're zooming. Let's see. Agenda item 8, this is the Chief of Police's report, but I believe that Arlo is here standing in the shoes of the chief. Welcome, Arlo.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm sorry for not introducing you by your title. You have to, it's a long title.
Arlo is perfect. Thank you. Yeah, good evening, everybody, members of the board. Thanks again for having me. Yeah, Chief Lewis and Deputy Chief Tate are unable to be here tonight, so I'll provide the department's update. And yes, a few new faces since last time I was here. I'll give a quick introduction. And by the way, congratulations, Board Member Edmonds, on your swearing in. I am the Strategic Planning and Accountability Manager with the PD, and within that portfolio, I work closely with the Chief and Deputy Chief on many of the reports and actions that make it to this group. So I've had a chance to work directly with a few of you, and I'm always looking forward to more opportunities to get to do that. Okay, so a couple cases of interest. First, as you are likely aware, there was an officer-involved shooting that occurred on April 13th. I know the chief communicated this incident to the ODPA on the day it occurred. We're currently working to complete the critical incident video package and collect all associated videos, and those will be released pursuant to the Public Records Act. The law requires that requested videos and recordings related to OISs be released within 45 days of the event. So today is day 10, and I anticipate we'll be releasing those materials well before the 45-day deadline. Additionally, last night around 11:40 p.m. In the 2500 block of Durant Avenue, near Telegraph, there's a physical altercation and stabbing. So our responding officers were able to apprehend the two suspects at the scene. They're currently in custody. The victim sustained serious injuries, was transported to a local trauma center and remains in critical condition. Our homicide detectives have taken over the investigation, which is active and ongoing. I can share that our investigators were fortunate to obtain video evidence captured by bystanders at the scene. And it's worth noting, interestingly, that this specific location on Durant and Telegraph has been identified by council as a site for installation of a fixed surveillance camera. And of course, in this case, the camera there could potentially have provided additional footage of the incident. Okay, shifting to community events. We've had several successful community engagement efforts recently. We attended the city's flashlight egg hunt on April 18th, the spring egg hunt at Cesar Chavez Park on April 19th, participated in Cow Day activities on the 19th as well. And then just yesterday, we hosted a Coffee with a Cop event at the South Berkeley Senior Center. And that was a big success. We had members of our Community Services Bureau to share coffee and conversation and to connect with some of the local residents. It was a big turnout. We had 50+ people attending. We're just so grateful to everybody who came out to spend time with us. These events are about building trust and strengthening relationships and creating a space for open dialogue in the community. So we really love those. And then looking ahead, we're preparing for the upcoming Berkeley Bay Festival and the Gilman Street Fair this coming weekend. So we'll be there. Staffing levels, we are at 149 sworn officers out of 181 authorized, 140 available for solo duties. And we have conditional offers extended to 4 recruits. Dispatchers were staffed at 17 out of 36 authorized, 15 are solo, and we've got conditional offers out to 3. And then we currently have 22 community service officers out of 27 budgeted positions and conditional offers out to 5. So we're hoping to be fully staffed there shortly. And like Director Aguilar mentioned, the city manager recently implemented a hiring freeze across the city. We're aware of the impact this may have on filling those vacancies I just mentioned and onboarding those conditional offers. But we're in close communication with the city manager's office and HR and regarding next steps for our overall staffing plan. And just a final note, I would like to thank the chair and vice chair, as well as Analyst Murillo, for meeting with Deputy Chief Tate and Sergeant Rafferty this week to discuss the status of the MOU compendium. As they shared in that meeting, we anticipate the updated compendium to be presented to council by summer at the latest. So that's all I have for you. Happy to take any questions.
Questions for
Arlo.
Arlo? I was gonna say, I was gonna say spam,
Yeah,
spam
that's a-
Malmberg, but that sounds kind of, not.
I respond to spam as well. I'll respond to that.
Any questions for Arlo? Yes, Julie.
Yeah, I have a question for you. It actually relates to a later agenda item, 10D(2) about the fair and impartial implementation report, fair and impartial policing implementation report. I don't know if you know the answer to this, or maybe our chair does, but in page 71 of our materials, it says that BPD invites the members of the PAB to attend scenario-based training designed to train officers to recognize and minimize implicit bias. And I'm just wondering, I was happy to see that, and I'm wondering if you knew when those trainings might take place.
Yeah, so we're still workshopping this joint letter with the chair, and I think that's one of the pieces that maybe we need a little more clarity around exactly what is going to be available to board members. I know that we've offered the opportunity for you all to attend some or to sit in on trainings that are occurring or to review some of the materials. So I don't have any dates on anything specific that we'll be inviting you to, but we'll get that clarified for the final version of that joint letter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this agenda item should clarify that this is a draft and it's not,
Okay, I didn't-
it's not finalized. Yeah,
That was not clear.
yeah, thanks for flagging that, Arlo.
Yeah, well, we're close.
If I may, are we staying for our conversation later tonight on that policy review, or?
I'm sorry, I need to take off after this, but I appreciate
Okay.
the invitation. Yeah.
No problem, and the only reason I asked is there's a note in that report about potential capabilities of the flood camera, so I don't know if that was something you'd be able to speak to, but we could always follow up at a later time, but.
Yeah, I'll be happy to receive any follow-up communication and get you any answers you need.
And the other quick question, was one of your upcoming events, did you mention Juneteenth, or?
Juneteenth, that's a few months out, but we'll be there as well. The ones I was mentioning were just for this upcoming weekend. So I don't have the extended calendar in front of me here.
No problem. The only reason I mentioned, because I neglected to mention this, so I'm trying to plug that in. For our board members, we usually participate in Juneteenth, so does the police department, so we'll circulate that information if you wanna be on at that event and helping us raise awareness.
Okay, any other questions for Arlo in the department? Okay, thanks so much, Arlo.
All right, thanks everybody. Great to see you all.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 9, subcommittee reports. Jose.
Thank you, Chair. As a reminder, this is the time for subcommittees to report on their activities, announce any upcoming meetings, possible appointments, or reassignments of members to those subcommittees, as well as for the board to report on any policy review work that they might be doing. With that said, I'll now start with the regulation subcommittee. Any updates?
And if we could actually give a brief description of what you're doing for the benefit of board member Edmonds. Just
Yes, so what we're doing is board member Lethbridge and I are on the regulations subcommittee that is currently meeting with the internal stakeholders, which includes the chief, HR, the city attorney, the city manager, and Director Aguilar, and us. So we meet over the regulations that govern the filing and processing of complaint allegations. And so we need to, we reach consensus among ourselves, the internal stakeholders, for the purpose then of negotiating with the police union in a process called meet and confer. And at some point down the line, if there are issues that we cannot reach agreement with the union over, those would go to city council. So if you reach what's called an impasse, it goes to city council to determine. So as you might imagine, it's a very long, tedious process. Part of it is reaching agreement among the internal stakeholders. And then presenting our proposal to the representative, the lawyer for the union. He presents his proposals, and then it goes back and forth. The bulk of our time so far has been among the internal stakeholders. And so we had, I don't know how many meetings we've had so far, but a lot. And they're long. And we're having one, I believe, the end of this month. Among the challenges is simply getting on the calendar meetings that everybody can make, since everybody's busy. So there are some really major issues, and then there are some other issues that are very important, but have more to do with more minor but important issues, let's say. And so I guess that's my report. Julie?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add is that the regulations were passed by this board 2 years ago. And one of the issues is that it's not everybody who voted to pass those regulations is currently on the board. Through this process, once we have a consensus among the internal stakeholders, and once we've figured out which issues are the pain points with the union, once we finally have the regulations agreed upon, we will have to come back to this board and have this board vote on them. If this board doesn't pass them, then we'll have to go back through the whole process again. And so one thing I've asked the city attorney's office and discussed with board member Calavita is whether it would make sense for us to bring back certain portions of the regulations once they're basically agreed upon, and discuss them in closed session with our board, just to make sure that that there's an internal consensus among the board members. Since again, not everybody who's on the board now, plus things have changed, even if we had all agreed upon things 2 years ago, throughout this process, the regulations have changed. So I had asked the city attorney's office about that, whether there were any legal obstacles or whether they just had advice in general about this process. And I hadn't heard back. I followed up again today. But just to throw that out there, that's something that we have to figure out process-wise. And it's a challenge because the regulations are so long and detailed. And we don't want to go through all this and then have there be some internal problem amongst the board members. So that's another issue that we're struggling with.
I also wanted to point out, and this is for everybody as well as the new members, we have many functions and duties as a board. One of which is to hear complaints from community members over police misconduct allegations. That's what these regulations tackle, how that process is going to work. Who can file, in what way, et cetera, et cetera. But these regulations do not address other of our functions, like policy reviews or practices reviews and complaints. And I think historically, that's partly because allegations of police misconduct can result in recommendations for discipline. And so therefore, the union has a particular interest in that for their employees, okay? But it is important to point out that the regulations are about the complaint process, because later on in the agenda tonight, we'll see confusion within city council about that issue and what our regulations address and don't address. So that's it for our subcommittee.
Thank you for that overview.
Okay, policy review subcommittee.
I don't think we have anything to report, correct?
You want to give a brief overview of what we do?
Sure. So, we consider, where to begin? So as board member Calavita said, in addition to hearing complaints against, officers, we also consider, possible changes to policies. And so the current policy we've been looking at is the vehicle pursuits policy, which is another, it's not lengthy, but it's complicated. And so our subcommittee meets with members of the department, and we go through and make recommendations about issues and potential changes to the policies. There's a lot of back and forth, and that's actually gone pretty well. There's one issue that we didn't agree upon that has now gone to the city manager, and we haven't heard back about, but that has to do with certain, what's the term I'm looking for? Interventions, yeah, certain techniques, certain maneuvers, like the pit maneuver, that are particularly dangerous in urban areas like Berkeley. But other than that, we had a good working relationship with the department. So we'll see what happens there. And then the next policy that we're going to focus on is the body worn camera policy, which is another one that's really important and complicated and interesting. If there's anything else you want to say about that?
No. The only other update is that Berkeley law students have been helping us do some like background research, and they're going to provide us with their research by the end of the week. So at the next meeting, I can report on that, and maybe one or two of them can come.
And I guess the only other thing I'd say about the policy work is just speaking for myself, I think it's very significant. More significant than hearing the individual complaints, because as we heard, the good news is there aren't a lot of serious claims of misconduct. But the policy work, there's a lot of room for improvement, even though Berkeley has generally good policies, but still there's room for.
Metrics and operations.
I don't have an update other than I'm continuing to work on our policy manual. So we haven't met with our new composition, me and board member Wells. But this is subcommittee reflects a combination of two previous subcommittees. And the general scope includes things like policy manual for outlining the operations and functioning of this board, including our mandatory responsibilities and our discretionary responsibilities, something I think that's really important. It does address some of the issues that you just raised, Katie, like how to do a policy review to bring forward to the board a standardized format for those kinds of reviews pursuant to a policy complaint, those kind of issues. So this policy or procedures manual is one of the key deliverables that needs to come out of that subcommittee. That subcommittee also has, as part of its remit, reviewing the budgets of the Berkeley Police Department and the ODPA. And then lastly, the annual report. So you heard from Director Aguilar that once he finishes with the latest revisions to the report, he's gonna send it my way pursuant to my role in the subcommittee. So I'll have to include Board Member Wells in that as well.
Thanks, Vice Chair Wilson.
All right, so outreach and engagement.
I'll let you take the lead. No, this is your thing.
Chair Catania and I met yesterday on outreach and engagement, which we are sort of loosely defining as an initiative to raise awareness within the city of Berkeley, both internal stakeholders as well as the general public. Our mission, what we do as a board, as well as I think just raising general awareness around who we are, what we do, how they can reach out to us, things of that nature. Some of the topics that we talked about in terms of engagement is, continuing to build a relationship with the city council and I think various other departments within the city, with the goal of repositioning the perspective of us being seen as trusted public service experts, as well as reaching out to different local community organizations, whether they're small community organizations or nonprofits in each district, so that we can cover all of Berkeley. And then the other thing we talked about was potentially launching a newsletter as a pilot, so that there's another channel where we can have direct communication with the city of Berkeley, so that they have regular communication from us. And I think a goal that we have is to try and collect 1% of all City of Berkeley residents' email addresses to sort of start with. We haven't figured out the tactics on how we're gonna do it, but we're meeting next Tuesday, and so I think the next meeting will have more, I think, tangible direction on how to go about it to share with the board.
And then the accommodation.
Oh, yeah, and then, it's funny because I did write that down. The chair and I also did get a chance to take a look at, accommodations, and that's, an additional thing that we'll follow up on next Tuesday in terms of next steps. Thanks, yeah.
That's all you. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, and then the next subcommittees don't hold, so they don't have any updates. That's BP policy 1010 and 1034 review. With that said, we'll proceed to our liaison list. Chair Cayetano, any updates regarding the EIS?
I have no updates other than the implementation is still underway, and we have like an understanding right now that while they're matching up their data inputs and outputs, our communication is on pause a little bit until that's finalized. So we're gonna circle back in the summer. Yeah, that's the only update.
Vice Chair Wilson, any updates in FIT related matters since our last meeting?
No.
And Board Member Calavita, any updates regarding policy reviews since our last meeting?
You mean the policy review you and I have been working on? I'm gonna send that back to you to report on.
Fair enough.
If that's okay.
Yes, that's more than okay. As we reported at the last meeting, Board Member Calavita and I have been conducting a fair amount of research on it. And we found that at least within California, there isn't exactly a policy that speaks to the issue of
Could you remind
remind
everybody
us.
what the issue is?
the issue in question is an overhead summary, is whether officers that are subject of complaint, whether they should be having the interactions with the person who filed the complaint. As part of that specifics is to, one, initially, are there any other existing policies in California that sort of establishes that framework for review? Our research so far has found that there isn't one in California. So what we're doing as a subcommittee is working on language to propose to the BPD and a central procedure for us to be able to incorporate that here in Berkeley. What was left off at the last meeting was that we'll be coordinating and working with the Berkeley Police Department in order to, in a way, coordinate the logistics and see what concerns they might have that we should take into considerations for our regulations. So in terms of next action items, the ball is currently in our office's court. We're conducting further research and gathering those thoughts for the BPD so that we could submit an initial proposal so we could build off of that. So that proposal is still ongoing. It's one of my priorities from here to our next meeting to be able to provide more substantive update.
If I may, just one quick update that came from last meeting too. We floated the idea or explored the idea at the last meeting whether a CAD note could be put into the computer assisted dispatch system. We put whether there's prior interactions. The lieutenant indicated last time that there might be this preliminary review, there might be some issues with POBAR entering some information, whether there's a complaint against an officer. So logistically, there might be some barriers, but we're still doing, as the analyst said, some review on how can we institutionalize something like this?
And with that, here we have another issue.
Okay. Moving on to the actual substance of why we're here today. Not actually. 10A, discussion regarding the BPD's mutual aid agreements with other law enforcement agencies. And this is a continued item from last time. I'm going to provide a brief update and also refer to the fact that we have supplemental material in the other packet, the smaller packet, that is a result of our meeting that we had with the department yesterday. We met with the department yesterday, partially because we knew that the chief and deputy chief would be out of town today and that they wouldn't be able to attend. And we met regarding our continued questions and investigation, I would say, into BPD's mutual aid agreements with federal law enforcement agencies, specifically immigration agencies like ICE and Border Control, even the Drug Enforcement Agency. And I think that we were going into that meeting with 3 outstanding questions. The first was, what is the current status of BPD's MOUs? Because the last that we heard was that the compendium of MOUs was submitted to council in 2018. And there is a really black and white explicit directive in the municipal code that says that the department must, like that essentially every mutual aid agreement is no longer effective after a year. And so it must be presented to the council. And so the fact that it hasn't been presented since 2018 renders essentially every mutual aid agreement ineffective and invalid on its face. And so we are concerned about that. And we were asking for a prospective timeline from the department for when they plan to present that. And I would say that on that particular item about when they plan to present it, the timeline was faster than I expected because this is a very, very, very lengthy compendium. They said that initially their plan is May, possibly June, to present it before council. I know that Arlo said summer at the meeting. They said May or June, and so we intend to follow up with that as that progresses, and also raise the issue of whether it is efficient or feasible for these MOUs to be presented every single year. Many of the MOUs the department pointed out don't change. They haven't changed since the 1970s, the 1990s. And so there's an active policy question for us to consider about a recommendation to council about which MOUs should be reviewed every year and which ones should be effective if they haven't been reviewed after a year. And so that's something that we should discuss today because it is something that we will have to write about when we write to council. And the second thing that we discussed with them was this continued discussion of general versus verbal understandings with federal law enforcement agencies. And I think that, again, we were concerned about this idea that a verbal understanding could exist, because the Berkeley Municipal Code essentially says that all agreements need to be reduced to writing, and that there can be, I mean, like the purpose of what is written in code is that there can be no verbal agreements. And so we wanted to make sure that there were no verbal agreements that were in effect. And I think the answer that we got from the department was that there are no current verbal agreements, but it's not feasible, it's not possible for Berkeley Police Department to have an official formalized memorandum of understanding with every single, federal agency. And so the question is, if there is no official MOU with every agency, what would fill in its place? And so there needs to be some sort of catch-all policy that directs BPD or it instructs and governs how BPD officers should act in those situations. So for example, when there's some sort of like ad hoc operation that's happening in Berkeley, BPD officers need to know how to interact with those agencies. And so that is what the purpose of the general understandings are. And they directed us to the general understandings that are in the compendium, and they also directed us to general policy. One of the policies that they directed us to that falls in this gap is policy 415, which is this immigration law policy that is in the supplement. And the immigration law policy essentially is what governs BPD interaction with ICE. And so an active question that I think coming out of that meeting for the board to consider is whether or not and how we want to review policy 415 in light of everything that is going on in the country. As one of the members of the public pointed out, the federal government is being very aggressive, and there have been reports, it's been confirmed that some members of UC Berkeley have had their visas rescinded, and that ICE has been coming into schools within the Bay Area. So I think that review of this policy is timely and necessary, but there's an open question about how we're going to review this policy, under what mechanism, and what recommendation would come out of that review. The third thing, and the final thing that we discussed with them, I know this is a large mouthful, is there is currently, and we confirmed this with them, authorization for Berkeley Police Department to, when they are investigating a crime, if that person being investigated is a non-citizen, then they can request assistance or information from a federal immigration agency in order to support their investigation or their law enforcement purpose. And so that I think is a policy question for this board to consider, because currently BPD does not allow, the Sanctuary City Ordinance in Berkeley does not allow for BPD to assist or facilitate immigration enforcement with agencies, but it does allow, the current ordinance does allow for BPD to request law enforcement cooperation, or cooperation for a law enforcement purpose with these agencies. And so BPD gave an example during the meeting of someone who they said it happens infrequently, but there was someone maybe like 15 years ago who was suspected of sexual crime, and they fled the country, and they had to work with ICE and Border Patrol in order to extradite that person. And that was their example of one way that they have to work with this. I think my question back to them was, how necessary, under what circumstances, is there a policy that would set forward under what circumstances BPD would reach out to an agency like ICE? And the answer is no, there's not one for that specific purpose. And so that's an active question for this board to consider. So there's a lot of information there, but I think it falls in these three buckets. The first being the submission of the compendium, the second being oh my gosh, I'm blanking. The second being the
Informal understanding.
informal understandings, and the third being this policy question. And so open the floor to maybe Vice Chair Wilson first, if she had some thoughts at the meeting, if you want to share some of the, like, tee up some more policy questions for the board or.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are, one, I think a requirement for annual council approval is onerous and not realistic. Two, it's clear now that whether you have an MOU or you don't have an MOU is not dispositive on whether or not the police department provides assistance to other agencies. And so I'm wondering about a requirement to have an MOU at all. If there is a reliance in the absence of the MOU on some underlying policy, then perhaps our focus should be on the policy. And augmentation to include reporting on when aid is provided, as opposed to having a requirement for an MOU at all. So those were some of the things that I was thinking about as structural changes. Yeah.
I have a question. And so if the local ordinance requires annual review, and so we were given a memo from former Chief Greenwood, which noted that the PRC, this body's predecessor, provided input. Why has there been no review for the past 7 years? Did you get an answer to that?
They don't have the resources, staffing resources.
All right, I still find that pretty astounding that at a minimum, they should have asked for council approval not to do it, or to extend the time so it is an annual. Because if you do these things more often, it isn't as onerous as if you wait for 7 years to go by, so. But did you ask that question about why they just said it was?
Well, they said they tried, there was COVID, first of all, and then the second reason they gave was in 2023, there was a turnover internally of who was handling it, and they were going to present it, and that was what happened.
But they're null and void if they're not.
Yeah, let me read the provision for everyone.
Right.
Into the record, and actually, BPD, you know, they didn't agree with this until I read the provision, and then they were like, oh, shoot, okay. So I'll read it. I mean, it's pretty plain. It says, no such agreement, understanding, or policy shall be valid or effective for more than 1 year following city council approval, but each may be renewed or extended following the disclosure, public hearing, and documentation procedures provided for in this section. And this is like talking about BPD's, the police department's agreements with other law enforcement agencies. So, I mean, it says, shall, no such agreement shall be valid or effective for more than 1 year. And so currently, legally, we're in a void, which I think is a big issue.
But what we heard is, they don't see it as an issue.
Yeah,
They rely on the policy. So that's what I said.
They rely on the policy.
A policy, we have the number. The policy that they rely on to provide these services irrespective of the status of an MOU. So that's why I believe it may be a more practical approach to abandon the concept of an MOU or limit the circumstances under which an MOU was required and focus on the provisions of the policy.
You do need them though when it comes to interjurisdictional.
Well, if they don't, clearly, because they don't have valid MOUs right now.
Or maybe they think everybody's operating under the assumption.
No, they were clear that even for some jurisdictions, they've never had an MOU, but they still provide services pursuant to a policy. There's some jurisdictions for which they don't have any MOU, expired or not.
Director, did you have,
Just specifically as it relates to the ICE MOU, the chief did share something with us, and we'll include it, she shared it yesterday. We'll include it in the record, but there was an additional council item, action on September 13, 2018. And the subject of that, report was disposition of MOU compendium item 3.4 regarding Berkeley Police Department interaction with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So there was some interaction with the PRC recommendation, and there was further action, but in the essence, it talks about the policy 415. So we'll include that for a full record, but just wanted to let you know, on the July date, there was on the September 2018 meeting by council.
And as far as just needing policies, like for example, the University of California, there seems to be issues, some lack of clarity about who's responsible for what, and this has come up before, when there are issues with it was noise, for example, on a house that was on campus, and when the Berkeley police are supposed to be called versus the campus police, and so it seems to me that you would need an MOU for that. Because otherwise, I don't think Berkeley can unilaterally decide, or maybe it can, but it sure seems to me that you should have an MOU with the University of California.
Yeah, and again, it may be, I floated this idea with the department that you abandon MOUs or rely on the policy. It's not, I don't think they reacted to it one way or the other. And as I just said, it may be that in certain circumstances, there should be an MOU. I just think it's obvious the status quo doesn't work. It doesn't seem feasible to say, well, you should just comply with the requirement, because an annual approval process is very onerous. And as we said before, we're all working with the same staff when we work with BPD. Their administrative level, analytical and above level resources are limited. So that's a reality, right?
Well, so they sure should, I mean, given that, they should be asking the council for a new ordinance, because the ordinance is still in effect and it's being
I agree,
violated.
and we could support that as well.
Yeah.
If that's what I'm saying, I think if we're open to coming up with a recommendation of what really makes sense here, right?
Yeah, I think we want a temperature check on, for example, only reviewing MOUs that have had that have had any change within that annual year. And if we can limit the renewal to those as opposed to all of them, that would make sense to me.
But perhaps there should be some limit that they're not valid, forever.
Well, that was also what Vice Chair Wilson said, was that they shouldn't be, perpetual.
Right.
And that there should be I don't know, 7-year, 10, something 10-year, I don't know, but it also, there's benefit to us being able to review the MOUs, as well. And so, I mean, we have the ability to do that regardless of this.
And how many are there again?
A ton.
There's a lot.
You have a number.
I don't know, the compendium is 500 something pages.
So is it 80, something like that?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
Okay, I don't know. The thing is not over 550 pages. Yeah.
One point too that I'll make in terms of the nexus to the personnel complaints, in the transparency hub, we have noted in prior communications to and conversations that sometimes the police department, for different reasons, do police activity outside the boundaries of the city of Berkeley, and they might have lawful reasons, but we're in a precarious legal situation, as the chair mentioned. If we're actively going beyond our boundaries, we don't have active MOUs with them. So that's something that we really need to be careful about, because that's implications for the rights
Well,
of the
that's a good point, because we did have a case.
Yeah.
And I remember we were given that MOU saying that, shouldn't speak about it too much, but that's a very real scenario that did come up. So I would think we'd want to prioritize those ones, the relationship with jurisdictions, with our other jurisdictions in the area that the police would be possibly going into their jurisdiction, or they're coming into our jurisdiction. But I guess that it can't just be policy, because it can't be unilateral. It can't just be us deciding what we're going to do vis-a-vis other jurisdictions. We have to have an agreement with those other jurisdictions.
So what were you hoping to get out of this?
There's not an action. I would say that I wanted to provide the update on our meeting from yesterday. And I also wanted to come back at a future meeting with a written proposal for 1 and 2 and 3 that we will consider with the department, and also flag for council, because I think that council right now is very unaware that that we're out of compliance with 2.04 or 0.190, and so we have to, in the same breath, say we're out of compliance, but also recommend a change, because it seems like this is not a sustainable solution. But I'm hoping we can do that for both 1, 2, and 3. And we're focused on 1 right and 2, I guess, but active question about 3, where when it comes to BPD's ability to reach out to federal immigration authorities to further a law enforcement purpose. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. It is a very hard, I would say, policy issue in the sense of, I don't know, they gave the example of if there's a federal agency here and someone decides to, pull out a gun and shoot someone, then they're gonna respond to that situation to assist. And it could be interpreted like a policy shouldn't prevent them from doing that. Like that was the implied message. But I think that the concern, again, like that I was flagging for them was like, if you are providing information about a suspect in Berkeley who is a non-citizen that's conveying information, and it could be under the guise of a law enforcement purpose, but you're also alerting federal immigration authorities to people who are in Berkeley in violation of an ordinance. And I just am kind of unclear about how the policy is allowing for that to happen right now. But perhaps like we can, I guess my question is, how do we want to review this immigration law policy 415? Because we could, the policy subcommittee has ducks lined up in a row right now. And it seems to me like someone should take a close look at this policy and try to identify anything that needs to be reviewed, kind of in light of what's going on in the country, since it seems like it hasn't been reviewed in 5 years. So I don't know if anyone's particularly interested in 415 and would like to come back with a highlighted version of this, but that would be my request.
And how did you leave it with the department? What are next steps after your meeting with them?
The next step is I said I would follow up with a sort of like recommendation for this renewal process, and also, flagging for council that the department will be submitting it by the summer of this summer. I'm not sure yet about whether this part of the policy review will we work into that flag. So I'm not hearing anyone particularly interested in 415. I will say that I'm presenting, or I'm attending the Sanctuary City Task Force meeting tomorrow, the mayor's task force. And I intend to ask the community there to review this as well and to get their input, because those people are very plugged into the immigrant community in Berkeley, and they might have better insight into pain points that we cannot see. But I'm not really hearing any volunteers right now, so I don't think we can take action on it at this moment.
How does this 415 interact with the MOU or?
Yeah, so the MOU 3.4 was rescinded because of the Sanctuary City Ordinance, and in its place, 415 sprung up.
I see.
And so 415 is what governs interactions between BPD and ICE. And if you look at maybe the end of former Chief Greenman's report, it says on page 9, this is that section where it's describing that. Okay, so we can pause on that and move on. I think that one thing that I also wanted to flag for us is that the introduction to the compendium, when it was presented to council, actually says on page 11 here of the supplemental The first whereas says, the Berkeley Police Department has established written and verbal agreements, understandings and policies. And I just want to point out that after conferring with the city attorney's office, they cannot have verbal agreements. And so this simply should not be a part of the presentation next time it goes before council. It should be written agreements or general understandings, but not verbal agreements. And so that's something I also want to flag for the department and for the council when we present this to them.
Although general understandings, that's pretty vague too.
Yeah, but I thought that we heard that the practice is they don't have agreements with all these jurisdictions and they fall back on their policy. So
That's formally true, but I think that they communicate when things on an ad hoc basis. That was sort of like the idea that I got.
and you think that's okay, ad hoc communication, or you're saying no? So you're saying they can't do what they're currently doing?
To me, it sounded like they have fallback provisions that are written down that somehow that will satisfy that provision.
But satisfy
Not-
the requirement that you're suggesting we recommend to council?
No, I don't know if this is like cosmetic or an actual recommendation, but I want to point out to them that they cannot be a verbal agreement.
Okay, I mean, I think we're getting back to, what are our actual recommendations, because they do have verbal agreements right now, right? They have.
Their answer was no.
They have no agreements. They fall back on the policy sometimes with no agreement.
I think that the general understanding was, and yes.
So we're saying to council, they can't do what they're currently doing. I don't want to do that. I want to say the whole thing needs to be revamped. But I don't want to suggest that they can't do what they're currently doing because I don't think it's realistic. So that's my response to what you're suggesting. I think there's a huge problem. They've been out of compliance for 7 years and we're the ones to call them on that. That's very problematic. We have to address that. And then a new process needs to be developed clearly. I'm not sure what that is, but I don't think we should kind of rule something out right here, right now.
I don't know if it's problematic that we're raising this issue. You think it's problematic?
No, like the city manager's office there should be some
No, but-
controls in place. To say, wow,
But
we
we're
have
the
a
ones
city
that
agency
we're the
that's
one that
non-compliant for 7 years. There should be a control, like,
Right.
in the chain of command in the city hierarchy.
There should be, but there,
Right, but there wasn't,
Yeah.
and we discovered it, so I think that's useful.
I do too. I don't mean, I just mean like structurally, it's
Oh.
not ideal.
Oh, representative,
Yes.
I thought you were saying we shouldn't
No,
say
no,
that we
no,
were the ones that just.
No, I think we should. So I would be more comfortable providing something to councils that we've identified this as a huge issue. They're not compliant. There's a problem with the frequency of their current requirement. We believe a new structure should be established for the review and approval of these. And, we'd love to work with the department on that, something like that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, I think we can table it for now and return with the proposal. I'll work on it myself and with the vice chair's help. Okay, great. Let's move on to the next agenda item unless anyone else has more comments on this. Okay, moving on. 10B, discussion and action on object presentation of policy complaint number 19 concerning the detention and release of inebriated individuals. Director.
Our analyst is gonna make the presentation. He wanted to play you in face him or we talking about it.
Yeah.
We're doing some dry runs. Just to give you just a gentle preface, this is a very serious, unfortunate event that happened in our community. A community member did pass away. And we also respect that, the concern that, the timeliness and how much time we're taking on these concerns. We appreciate the board's trust in us and the community's trust in us. We want to make sure we're being meticulous with this. This was almost all hands on deck. effort from our office, a lot of, reviews went through, we wanna make sure we're being accurate. And then we'll be thorough with what recommendations, if any, we don't want this situation, to happen again, and to the event that we can, mitigate this, we wanna make sure we were in firm ground for recommendations, but we just wanna emphasize, how serious we took this particular, incident and the review of it, so take it away.
It's not very often I get to use the podium. But I just want to echo the director's sentiments with this policy review. This was one of the first reviews that I took on when I started, almost 3 years ago, and with the given changing priorities, and the shift in the board's compositions, it was just one of those reports, that we couldn't ultimately get to because of the, multitude of urgent matters that comes across this board. So I just want to thank the team, for all their help, particularly investigator Wecker, who brought in a lot of knowledge for the investigation, into the fact pattern, into this report. So with that said, we go to the first slide, please. Okay, thank you. And the previous slide was just, there we go. Just a quick overview of what the presentation for today is going to be. We're going to start with a quick procedural background, provide an overview of the incident timeline. We recognize that this report was a lot longer than some of our other ones, rightfully so in our opinion, given the just how serious this incident was. We'll provide an overview of the incident analysis as well as the effective practices that we identified as along with our recommendations. Next slide, please. Procedurally, this policy review first came to the board on January 28, 2022. It started as a personnel complaint. The board was made aware through the various news media, or through various news outlets, that this incident had occurred. It was in limbo for about a year, pending just updates on whether the PRC's authority to self-initiate personnel complaints was still carried on to the Police Accountability Board. It was determined that that authority wasn't. So on January 31st, 2023, it was formally moved over to a policy review for policies, practices, and procedures. Next slide, please. So this outline here just provides a quick overview of the incident timeline. As we mentioned, the report is very detailed and it has a lot of moving parts that came about it. But key points we want to highlight is that this incident started as a call for service for an inebriated individual at a restaurant outdoor dining area. The call was made at approximately 8:40 p.m. With officers responding in less than 10 minutes to the call. When officers arrived, they confirmed the caller's description of the incidents, and they identified a community member who was intoxicated and appeared to not be able to care for himself. As a result, officers arrested them under Penal Code 647F, which is public intoxication. Before being taken to the jail, the community member was first taken to the Gracie shelter. The intention of the officers for our review of our records and the various interviews that were done, that we had in our possession, it was identified that officers preferred to take the individual to get him to sober up in a shelter and give him a place to sleep for his safety, where he could be cared for, the resources before going to jail. The individual was denied at the Gracie shelter. At the time, they were going by a voucher system and they weren't accepting walk-ins. So they were directed back to the Berkeley PD Sally Port, or the Berkeley PD jail, where the booking process would continue for them to sober, for the individual to sober up and the BPD sober himself, per BPD policy 900. Once there, as part of the routine booking process, the individual was given a brief medical evaluation to see if he was being fit for incarceration. Through that review, it was determined that the individual had some noticeable skin rashes on his arms and back. So jail staff denied him entry, and I recommended that the officer take him to the local hospital for a fit for incarceration evaluation. During this time, the involved officers consulted with their supervisor as to next steps. Through that conversation, officers were essentially presented with two options. The first one was to take the individual to the hospital for that fit for incarceration check. The second was to conduct that 849B release, which essentially says that the arresting officer has the option to release without any further proceedings the individual, so long as they are sober and able to care for themselves. The latter decision was ultimately taken after discussion between supervisors and officers about the individual potentially already being sober by the time that fit for incarceration screening had been completed. So given the release at April, after the release of 849B determination was made, the man was released at 11 p.m. Right outside of the Sallyport area on Addison and McKinley, where he stayed for the remainder of the incident. At approximately 1 a.m., an officer returning to the Sallyport area noticed him. He wasn't wearing what the officer deemed at the time to be appropriate clothing for the weather. This was early January, so the low for that night was 41 degrees Fahrenheit, or it ranged up to 49 degrees Fahrenheit per historical weather record data. And the officer provided a blanket to the individual. The next contact was at 5:30 a.m. After that initial contact was at 5:30 a.m. where another officer found the individual shirtless, unresponsive, and told to be touched. That officer called for the Berkeley Fire Department, conducted a medical evaluation of the scene, and later transported him to the hospital. En route to the hospital, the community member became unresponsive, and life-saving measures were initiated. And unfortunately, at 6:55 a.m. the following day on January 9th, he was pronounced dead. The coroner's findings dictated that he died of natural causes. There was a toxicology report that indicated that his blood alcohol content was at 0.128. The legal limit is 0.08. I'll correct that on the record. But ultimately, they noted that the blood alcohol was not they couldn't determine if alcohol was a contributing factor to the death. Next slide, please. And just for reference, this is actually just up the street. This is the Sallyport, it's the gated area where arrestees are transferred in and out of the jail, and officers return back to the police station. Next slide, please. This report focused on 4 primary policies. The first was BP Policy 313, Senior and Disability Victimization. This policy provides the standards for ensuring the safety of elders and dependent adults. It's typically a policy that provides the protections in terms of elder abuse investigation, but we found it relevant because it provided guidelines about how elders and other vulnerable populations should be treated when in protective custody. The second policy was BP Policy 431, Medical Aid and Response. The reason for this policy was that there's a specific section on the requirements for medical evaluation for arrestees. BP Policy 440, Sober and Detoxification Center, provides the guidance for alternatives to the BPD jail, particularly taking arrestees to the Cherry Hill Sobering Center, which is in San Leandro, and it's used by the whole county hospitals. And then finally, there's BP Policy 900, which provides the temporary custody of adult guidelines from everything from their bucking to their release. And within that is Policy 900.11.2, which specifically talks about the use of sobering cells and the requirements around that. Next slide, please. There were three key themes that we identified as part of this review. The first was the gaps in the alternative to detention. From our report, we know about the different options in terms of 2020 and having that 2020 hindsight. But through the interviews with various officers, we found out that even though the Cherry Hill Detox Center was available at the time, the involved officers weren't readily familiar with that resource. So they went to the Grayson shelter as some was a resource that had been used before, but the Cherry Hill wasn't considered because they weren't readily aware of the policy. But for context, we looked a little bit more into the Cherry Hill Center in terms of what their bed capacity was and their overall capacity, given that they live in Service County. And their publicly available reporting, we found that the facility has a capacity for 50 beds at any given night. On a year, they've taken about 7,000 to 8,000 individuals, with their average capacity being full at 80% on any given night. With of course, different factors like weekends or other days playing a role in that. And then just one stat that we highlighted from what was available in the BPD Transparency Hub was that between 2018 to 2025, BPD has made up 837 public intoxication arrests, and they average about 10 every month. And for the most part, these are taken to the Berkeley jail whenever any of the other centers are available. The second was just in terms of evaluation of vulnerability in the release decision. As we noted in our report, this individual was of an older age. He was 75 years old. We know that there is a lack. One, there is a lack of consideration for the physical vulnerability to the individual. Our research showed that folks who are considered older adults, 65 and older, tend to be more vulnerable to the cold. They have a lower tolerance for alcohol, and their metabolism tends to be a lot lower. So we looked at these factors as a way to determine how vulnerable the individual would have been compared to, for example, a younger adult of that in those same conditions. In our review of the CCTV footage, we did note that the individual appeared to be frail. There was instances where he was physically seen, where he was perceived to be shivering from the angle that we had, as well as having difficulties walking on his own. Yeah. And then the last aspect was the post-release of monitoring and safety. One of the key highlights that we've brought here is that one of the options that officers have under the 849B release is to allow release to a medical diversion. So it doesn't necessarily have to be at the jail, but it could be a transport to the hospital, and that could be the release. And we also noted that, again, based on the CCTV footage, there appeared to be a lot of visual impairments that would have made the individual not be able to care for himself. As part of this, and in recognition that officers can't always be at every single place at any given time, we did find some research about the use of AI-enabled surveillance cameras that have been used for medical purposes. So not necessarily specifically for public safety, but also for general public welfare and helping identify community members who might be experiencing medical emergencies and nobody's around. Next slide, please. In our review of not just local law enforcement agency policies, but also from other states, we identified 6 key practices. The first was, of course, non-criminal care-based approach. Every jurisdiction in the area, as well as on a national level, from the International Chief of Police Association, totally butcher that. There's a recommendation about having, in terms of sobering cells, having alternatives to the jail process. So whether that be establishing a sobering center program, partnerships with the community sobering cells versus sobering centers. So that in itself is a discussion that's very actively accepted in the field. Medical evaluations before detention was also a common practice that even across our local agencies and across other jurisdictions is a key component in the sober release policy, as well as the use of sobering cells and the lack of other alternatives, and those aspects. Some of the other effective practices that we noticed was the overall just including more training to help observe vulnerability with specific community members and taking into account their needs, whether that be just identifying health risk or effectively diverting community members to available resources outside of the criminal justice system. And the last one was in terms of just vulnerability and assessment and trauma-informed care, which deals with, again, recognizing that individuals might have a heightened vulnerability to certain elemental factors that may have not made on that could make it more susceptible to just overall concerns for their health. Next slide. Okay. So our recommendations in summary, the first was in terms of revising the policies to include language around medical clearance and incorporating objective tools for safe release determinations. One practice that we found actually comes out of the state of Massachusetts, which before any sober release, they require that, they're not necessarily required, but the option is presented to community members to take a breathalyzer test before they're officially released. If they blow above 0.1, they still have to remain wherever they're being detained, whether that be typically in their sobering cell. But if it's below, if it's at 0.1 or below, they're deemed being able to care for themselves. So there's that objective standard before release. with the BPD and our current policy, it's more of what the officer perceives, if the individual is sober enough and able, to care for themselves. The second one was to look into the expansion of diversion, options. As you noted, there's currently only one real, option in place with the Cherry Hill Sobering Center. Every agency in the county is directed to that center. They only have a 50-bed capacity, and again, the stats that are currently available show that it's at capacity a majority of the time, with an average capacity of 80% on any given night. As we mentioned, the use of technology for public welfare is something that we're not necessarily bringing as a recommendation for adoption, but more board consideration in its upcoming review of fixed camera surveillance. There's current research being done on the use of it for medical purposes and being able to identify medical emergencies and flagging it for not just law enforcement, but whether that be the fire department or other EMS services. And the last one, and this is reference back to the breathalyzer, the law that comes out of Massachusetts is to call on the California legislature to establish statewide protective custody standards so that they're not as objective. And there's a clear standard or checklist before anyone's released. And I'll hand it back to the director.
So you're not subjective, you said
Subject.
So in, I apologize for the brief interruption, lucky was alerted, there was some commotion going on, so I thank you, Lieutenant, for checking in on it. One of the things, again, I just emphasize the Massachusetts model. It could be really tricky to utilize your discretion to try to make that assessment, is this person free to go or good to go? And given the limited, options that we have here, breathalyzer seems to be an obvious, tool that officers can and should be using. I'll also make the important distinction here that we were not making an assessment on whether the personnel, the officers involved here were, acting beyond or outside of policy more, so we're looking at what the practices and interpretation of policies were and whether there were any gaps. So we were doing the same sort of analysis that we do for the personnel, which is a preponderance of the evidence, whether there was a policy infraction, but more so relying on what is the policy and what are the practices surrounding it. So, but we'll take any questions that the board may have.
Well, thanks for your thorough presentation and report. This is a very long one, but it's a very well thought out and in depth, but I'll open it up to the board members for questions, comments. Yes, please, Board Member Calvita.
So just to be clear, there's nothing in policy 440 about the one about sobering and detoxification and releasing individuals. There's nothing in that policy that talks about how to determine if a person is still inebriated.
No, so policy, I believe, for make sure.
I think it's.
Oh, sorry, 440. Yeah, sobering and detoxification center. That policy is particularly focused on using the Cherry Hill Sobering Center. It doesn't actually provide guidelines for determining how to, essentially, if someone's sober or not. That policy is actually, or that aspect is briefly mentioned under BP policy 900 for sober release. And it's a standard lexical language that's used, not just in Berkeley, but across the comparator agencies that we use.
So there's no particular standard?
No, it's under the 849B standard, which is as long as it's perceived that.
It's subjective and discretionary.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It seems to me from what you described here and what you saw on the video, the man could hardly stand on his own. And when there are traffic stops for DUIs, aren't people asked to walk a line? I mean, it seems to me that there could be a standard short of having to get voluntary, approval. I'm not even sure this man would have been able to engage enough to say whether they agreed to have a breathalyzer. Why not just see if they can walk a line? This man would not have been released if he not, from what you've described, he could hardly stand up. Is that correct?
That's correct. And one note that we, during our review of the materials that we noted, was that part of the standard that was used in determining his release was that he was better than the initial contact, that officers had with him. As far as in terms of the standards of release, we didn't get a lot of information as to, what beyond that was used.
Good point, though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it would be effective to have a voluntary, like the individual has to agree to have a breathalyzer or whatever it might be. So I'm not sure about that.
If I may, though, I think one of the tricky elements of here is can the wobbliness or can the inability to walk properly, can that be directly associated with this perceived intoxication? I mean, this was also an individual was senior citizen, so there could be other explanations. And I think if we provide the officers a very objective tool like that, at the very least, they can rule that element out and say, well, it's not related to intoxication, it could be something else.
Yeah, if the individual agrees to it.
Right.
And also, when we initially heard about this and read about it, we were told, I thought it was implied at least, that the reason he was not taken into a cell was because of his skin condition.
Mhm.
And that hasn't really been addressed that much. Was that not accurate?
That's in here. They referenced it.
They reference it, but that's not being used as a reason why he was released. I thought he was released because they didn't want to take him in.
They didn't have
That
that.
was the reason for rejection from, or the denial of entry to the jail was because of that medical condition. But there wasn't an ultimate determination of whether it was contagious or not. So after that process where the jail staff denied entry to the community member, the process would have been that for enable for them to get accepted, they would need a fit for incarceration screening at a hospital by a qualified medical professional. Ultimately, that didn't happen because of the 849B release, which is where the officer's discretion comes into place. If the officer who made the arrest thinks that the person is sober enough and able to care for themselves, then they could release without further action. So that ultimate, the determination in itself wasn't made whether it was contagious or not.
Any other questions?
Yeah. First, thank you for this report. I thought it was really good, very thorough. Just thinking, based on what Board Member Calaviti just said, maybe it could be both, that there could be some standardized tests like walking straight line, whatever the CHB does. And then also offer the person the voluntary non-punitive breathalyzer test to determine that they can be safely released. So maybe it could be both of those things. A couple of thoughts I had. One is number 2 is to expand diversion options beyond Cleary Hill. And then there's also and number 4 was about calling on the California legislature to do something. And I was thinking that it might be also helpful to to call upon the city council to adopt a resolution asking that the Alameda County Board of Supervisors open an additional sobering center, to serve county residents. Because certainly having one sobering center with 50 beds is not adequate for a county of our size. So that could be an additional recommendation. And then as far as the 4th recommendation about the city council calling upon the California legislature to establish, these standards, I'm not sure how that works, if the city has done that before. To me, that sounds like it's so vague, and I don't know where that goes. If the city council just generally asks the legislature to do something, it seems to me, I mean, maybe they do that and it works, but it seems to me it might be more effective to ask our former mayor, who's now a state senator, or Buffy Wicks, who's an assembly member, ask them in particular to introduce legislation to do this, because just a generalized call to the legislature doesn't seem to me like it would be very effective, but again, I don't know how that's worked in the past. And then just the last thing, you have some suggested language to amend the penal code. And that sentence, it says, an individual taken into protective custody solely for public intoxication under the penal code shall be informed of the right to request a chemical breath test. And if I were writing this state law, I would just have right up front, either voluntary, although maybe that's a little redundant, but non-punitive. And then some language, like to determine whether released would subject the individual to unreasonable risk of harm, or to determine whether the individual may be safely released into the community. I would just put something right up there, because when you don't, you think, why is somebody gonna want a breathalyzer test? That sounds like, it sounds punitive. So I would just, even though that's not the intent, I would just have some language in there to make it real clear that this is for the benefit of that person. But again, thank you for the report. Very good.
Thank you for your suggestions.
Other comments, questions?
I have some comments and thoughts on the recommendation.
Go ahead.
I thought it was also an excellent report, but however, I think it was overworked and that it's just not feasible for us to get through the backlog of policy reviews that we have, if they're gonna be done in this way. So just looking at the list, I think we have 14 in our pending. I might be wrong. Thank you for putting that in the agenda each time. And I don't think we're getting through more than 3 a year, maybe 4. So we're looking at 3 or 4 years worth of backlog in our policy review. So while it was excellent, the presentation was excellent, I really encourage staff to come up with a streamlined approach. There's that draft approach to policy reviews that was worked up by former board member Blackby and I tried to use it for the policy review that I did. I just really encourage you guys to consider doing these in a different way so we can get through them. With respect to the recommendations, I'm supportive of the first one. It sounds like per the discussion, maybe it could be modified to incorporate some components beyond optional breathalyzers. I think that makes sense. I also just want to start by saying it's a horrible and really horrible to read. Just
It was a horrible incident.
painful to also know we have members of our community that are in that much pain that they're getting that inebriated. I mean, it's just, things are obviously not going, well for you if that's what's going on. So I just want to say that I'm supportive of number 1. Number 2, I didn't think there was any data to support a recommendation to expand options beyond Cherry Hill Sobering Center. I thought there was evidence to support a recommendation that all BPD officers be trained on the available jail staff, be trained on the existence of the Sobering Center. But we don't know that it was full at the time when this individual, could have potentially been brought there. So I'm not supportive of number 2. Number 3, I think it's interesting given our stance on surveillance technology generally. So I'm glad it's not really a recommendation, because I think we have to think about it more.
Yeah, I'm opposed to that
it's sort
also.
of-
I'm opposed to that one.
And then number 4, I'm not ready to call for this just because I don't know enough about it. I am, again, really supportive of recommending revisions to the policy to enhance the policy. This does seem like an interesting approach, the statutory approach, but I think we're taking on a lot by pursuing a statutory change right now. So my recommendation on the recommendations would be to move forward recommendation 1 with some revisions, not to advance the other recommendations. And again, to recommend that staff consider a streamlined approach to completing policy reviews.
It's close to an motion. I just want to make sure that everyone else has a chance to weigh in if there's any comments. I will say that my intuition when I read this was what you just articulated for those reasons as well, because for number 2, I didn't see any data about whether the beds are full. And that would be necessary data to recommend that expansion. Also for 4, for calling on the state legislature, I agree that it's we have to be judicious about what recommendations we make. I think it's interesting actually to consider when we do find policy proposals that are significant and that the community is providing input on, to actually pen a letter to an assembly member as opposed to calling on council to do something.
Can we do that though?
I don't know.
I don't think,
We haven't tried that yet.
I think I asked once, I can't remember, I was told that city council is the one to do that, but I could be wrong about that. That could be something that we could ask the city attorney's office. Could you add that to the list?
We can
I
add.
believe they did get a response, but I don't remember what it was, but
I
Yeah.
think it was a no,
yeah,
but
I think it was no.
And I think for 3, I mean, it's good to flag, the fact that cameras can be used, for, to identify public health emergencies. But I think, the one question that wasn't addressed in this is the absence or presence of a specialized care unit. And what role they would play in this situation in particular. For example, if a person is going to be released on their own recognizance, it would make sense for that officer to then call someone from the specialized care unit to be a helper, to be a friend in that situation. That seems to me to be more in line with what the council has considered and the resource where we've allocated resources, as opposed to, for example, expanding sober houses. What are they called? Sobering houses, or something like that. So I agree with your recommendation. I do have a question though about, I agree with the policy red line, and I think that we should actually simply send it to BPD to consider as part of the motion. I do have a question that board member Calavita raised about whether it's possible as a legal from a legal perspective, or even just like a personal perspective, to voluntarily agree to a breathalyzer when you're intoxicated, or even
Right.
when you're being arrested for public intoxication. That seems to me to be a contradiction, that you can voluntarily submit to something.
But if you're not intoxicated, I mean, it's true, you might not have the correct state of mind to give your consent. On the other hand, if I have a medical condition that makes me appear to be intoxicated and I'm not, I might want a breathalyzer test just to show that I'm not, so.
Yeah, I think like adding an option about another alternative besides a breathalyzer makes sense, and then I feel comfortable with that revision, agreeing to one and asking you to look into the specialized care unit as well. Friendly amendment to your implicit motion. And I also agree to find ways to streamline your review. But any thoughts on the specialized care unit?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. I was thinking about that too, especially now. I mean, the specialized care unit is going to be transferred to the Alameda County Behavioral, what's it called, services? Yeah. I would, if it's possible, add a friendly amendment to the friendly amendment.
I don't think we have a formal motion.
There's no formal motion.
No, let's still,
Let's still talk, okay, I feel strongly that one recommendation should be additional training on policy, because the fact that people involved in this incident didn't even know Cherryville existed, much less that that's an option for where this man should go. It's of concern, especially also in other instances we're familiar with. We've seen that there's some, I mean, I know, I can't imagine how hard it is to be familiar with all of these policies, all right? So I'm not faulting anyone, I'm just saying that given how often, I can't remember the number you said, 900 intoxicated individuals were taken over so this is not an unusual situation that an intoxicated person is brought in. I think they need to know where to take them.
if we have a specialized care unit, I think it's a good idea to get them involved, but then where are they gonna take the person?
I mean, accompaniment,
To where?
I don't know, I don't like,
I mean, so I think it's a good bridge between, just the department and the street, but still they're gonna need to take the person somewhere. So yeah, you do need a needs assessment. The county is not good at that, to determine it just sounds on its face that 50 beds can't possibly be enough for a county of how many million? I mean, I don't know, it's a huge count.
But on average, they're only full 80%.
Yeah, I saw that, and that seems surprising to me. Maybe it's because I think it's in San Leandro, right, Cherry Hill, so I don't know, maybe that's part of it. As far as the legislation, I agree that we should be careful what legislation we recommend that the city council champion. And having looked at some of the state laws around body worn cameras, I personally would feel like maybe I agree that we should hold off on that and wait until it's something that there's more data on, or where the flaws in state law are more apparent. And I think there are other areas that we might want to take that on. And I also do not support number 3, the use of AI-enabled surveillance cameras.
Okay, so I'm hearing some consensus building here around approving the red line to 431.9 and the red line to policy 900 with a small revision. And then also maybe a streamlined report back on potential proposals for SCU involvement in this, and then rejecting the other 3. But I would, if that's right, then we can move on.
I think it was just policy 900, so it's policy 431.
So 431.9 seems to be directing that sort of like height awareness of individuals at risk that.
Okay.
Here, it's right there, but there's no like directive in it.
Okay.
It's on page 58.
Okay, now I'm actually just looking for staff recommendations.
Okay. Does anyone feel obliged?
So the staff recommendation only speaks to policy 900. So is that just an oversight? Staff recommendation is revised BPD policy 900. But do you really want it revised BPD policy 4319 and policy 900?
Yes, and it's no oversight in the sense that we didn't include it, but because the policies tied together.
Okay.
Yeah, policy 431.
Okay, so I thought, board member Calavita was recommending a modification to policy 900.
She is.
Okay, so you're saying approve these red lines with that modification?
Yes.
Okay, and then, that's number 1, and number 2.
Reject the other 3 recommendations, and then number 3, ask them to come back with a specific recommendation for how to integrate SEs.
Okay.
And maybe there's a training component.
Number 4 is training to ensure that, relevant officers know about the option of Cherry Hill Sobering Center.
Was that a question?
I think you made it.
I'm not gonna make a motion, but if you wanna make it, I can make it, but
You just made it.
I was constructing the consensus.
Okay. Well, so
Are you
we spent
making
a
it?
lot of time on this.
Are you
I'm
making it?
happy to make it.
Okay, a second.
Okay, good.
Perfect. But that,
We'll get
yeah,
back to my desk where I'd like to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
yeah, thanks for all your work.
So, let's hope I joined this down correctly. So confirm, so on the motion to approve recommendation 1 with edits, reject recommendation 2 through 4, so the other 3, and come back with a reporting on the potential role of the SCU and the recommendation for training regarding the Cherry Hill Sobering Center. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, motion by Vice Chair Wilson, seconded by Board Member Calavita. Board Member Calavita,
Yes.
Board Member Evans,
Yes.
Board Member Lethbridge,
Yes.
and Board Member Wills,
Yes.
Vice Chair Wilson,
Yes.
and Chair Kaitar.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Okay, thanks for that lively discussion. Let's move on to the next thing. which I believe is something about outstanding requests, but let me find the exact item number. 10C, discussion action on the list of pending PAB requests to city council or city stakeholders, excuse me. Becker.
Yes, and this is, pursuant to a request that has been made to our office. The forms will get it to you, you may have not had enough time to review. There isn't necessarily an action to take per se, but just to give you, an understanding of some of the requests. We went back 6 months, so back to October, and again, we'll cross-referencing. We're trying to get as thorough as possible, and then you also included any, relevant, timestamps for the conversation, so, but this is a supplemental packet. It starts at page, 20 of the supplemental. And at the top paragraph, just a basic, summary statistics, there were about, 21 requests identified, between October 9th and April, October 9th, of 2024, and April 9th of this year. 8 had been completed, 11 remain open, and 2 were closed, or withdrawn. And, we fielded a lot of those ones, 14 was, and, 6 were to the BPE, 1 to the attorney's office, and 1 to the mayor's office. We were hoping we didn't miss anything, but if you don't see anything there, we're happy to update it. And we're also happy to provide this as a sort of standard thing, so you know where things are rather than, we get to a point where you get to ask, or you have to ask, if we're all like.
Got it. So some of these are requests that we've made to you.
Yeah,
Or
some of
like
them are,
the most of them are.
right, but some of them like the highway, that was, you know, something that was requested for BPD.
Is the request for the data from the controlled equipment report in here?
Yes. That is,
Is that number 2 on page 31?
no,
No, that's the vehicle pursuant. I don't see it in here.
we had it, if we did it, then it might have been this was on the agenda, but I could have sworn I reviewed it in here, but I made them, it might be contained with MOPs.
I think,
Do you recall if that particular control equipment is?
I think we may have missed out.
Okay.
okay, so, but that's 10E on our agenda item, right, today?
Yes.
Okay,
So that is
All right.
agenda.
well, thanks for this update. I think it's a good chart. Oh, go ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
just looking at number 18. That's about, I think that is the one that asked for this about, training videos.
Yes.
And so this request is being marked as complete as Lieutenant Montgomery indicated that the videos are on YouTube and there's a link. I guess I don't remember him saying that. And when I was proposing this, I was thinking it would be something that either we would, I mean, maybe not necessarily view as a board, but that there would be something more, I mean, I don't know what these videos are that's on YouTube, so.
Those are the post-training videos that I remember we had, and we can reopen it if it's not to your satisfaction, but I think what we were trying to close it out, and we do remember the lieutenant indicated that the ones there was a conversation about whether the department receives ones that are different than the ones on YouTube. And he indicated that there isn't necessarily, there might be like 1 or 2 that might be technical in nature, but for the most part, post is, the state post is putting them on YouTube. So he indicated that, I was working, with the California Post to try to get us direct access for those that might be tactical in nature, because the department can't necessarily give us the access, we need to work through them, so.
Maybe what would be helpful is just, I mean, if staff had the time, just to provide a little bit more information about what those are,
Yeah.
because, I would think the board would be interested in some of them and not interested in others, and especially new board members. You probably know you have 40 hours of training that you have to complete. And so, which is a lot. So this might be a good place for some of that training. But if staff can just provide a little guidance about the topics, that would be great.
We can do that, and we did, start to pull them, I don't recall if we completed that list, but we were trying to categorize them in Excel.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions about this? Well, thanks for the update, and I think it'd be good to include this going forward, yeah? If it's easy to update, okay, great. Moving on to agenda item 10D, recap, discussion, and action on next steps after the PAB's presentation to City Council and the Public Safety Committee, starting with 10DI, Berkeley Police Department texting offenses and independent investigation by the Police Accountability Board. I guess I'll start and then I'll kick it to Board Member Calavita. We presented last Tuesday, so not yesterday, but the Tuesday before that. And thank you to staff for preparing our presentation materials. We printed out on big poster boards, pictures of the text messages that we were investigating, and we had a lively discussion at council. It was at the outset, it was on consent calendar, which means that our recommendations weren't going to be discussed, but the council pulled it out of consent and had us present on it, which I'm very grateful for. And we discussed in tandem both the board's recommendations and the council's Councilmember Blackaby's resolution. And you know, our presentation, at least my portion of it, focused on the gap in policy with respect to an arrest quota ban. And I pointed out to them, to council, that current BPD policy doesn't ban arrest quotas within the city, and in fact says something to the effect of that the number of arrests shouldn't be the sole criterion of an officer's performance evaluation, implying, of course, that it can be a criterion, and not saying being silent with respect to arrest quotas. And the chief's position was that A, the department doesn't have a practice, and B, that state law currently prohibits the type of arrest quotas that we're asking city council to adopt. The city attorney the mayor asked the city attorneys for input on that point, and the city attorney said, no, the department is wrong. What we're asking for would be an expansion of what state law currently requires. And so there is still that gap, and my intention is to bring that specific red line policy that we proposed back to the city council, because it seems like there was appetite for it, but there was a procedural barrier because it wasn't listed in the action items on the council agenda. And so just going forward, I want the board to be aware of how we frame our recommendations. And I think that we need to be very clear that every single one of our recommendations are listed as recommendations, and that every single one of them are actionable in the sense that council can vote yes or no on them. If we're simply making an observation, it shouldn't be in the recommendation section, because I think that caused a little bit of confusion at council. And I think we can do better going forward. And I promised to them, in fact, that we will do better going forward. And in turn, I expect them to actually listen to the policy proposals that we're bringing forward. So that is my update. Board Member Calavia, actually, you were also there, and the director was also there, so I'll give him a second too. But Board Member Calavia.
Yes, that they actually listened to, because we did spend a long time developing this report. And, Chair Cayetano and I had 5 minutes to split between the two of us. So each of us got 2.5 minutes, which was hardly sufficient to really, discuss what we needed to discuss. But he's right, we did learn some lessons, among them, many things learned. One is that the agenda committee is extremely important, and we need to have our eyes not only on council and on us developing these reports, but we need to attend the agenda committee to make sure that, because when they set forth the agenda, that is what the council will look at, and only that. We had other recommendations in the report, but they weren't listed under recommendations to city council. So that's one thing. The other thing is that if we're going to recommend that city council pass a resolution, we need to write the resolution. I was not aware of this.
Yeah.
Like, because we asked for a resolution on, access to documents, for example. They wanted us to actually write the resolution, and so going forward, those are things that we will be doing. There was confusion in terms of access to documents, because some council members, and in fact, this was included in Council Member Blackerby's resolution, that the current regulations are in negotiation, and that would help clarify our access to documents. And it was, so the words were muddied, because what's under negotiation has nothing to do with the kind of documents that we were requesting in the downtown task force example. That was a policy and practices review, and the current regulations, or the regulations that we're negotiating now, are not relevant to that. It was extremely frustrating to sit there and wish that we could correct some misperceptions and not be able to. At one point, Director Aguilar noticed that I tried to grab the microphone to clarify something, but it was more or less denied us.
Also procedurally,
Procedurally, you need to wait to be asked a question in order to make a comment. And so when there was,
you can ask permission to respond.
well, it didn't seem like.
Okay.
I mean, the thing was, the moment that I was going to do that to clarify, I forget which council member had asked a question about a council member had asked the question about, are these negotiations ongoing? And at that point, I wanted to clarify, yes, but that's not what's at issue here. And the council member saw that I was about to say something and said, no, I was directing that to the city manager. And the city manager said, yes, that's correct, they're ongoing. And that was the end of that. So anyway, we learned a number of things. And I agree that, so now what I think we should do is present the arrest quota policy as a separate, well, work with the department to try to get agreement on that policy. Yeah,
You explicitly say there shall not, there
yes,
shall
because,
not be.
yes, because there is no policy, and there may be a practice, but it would be good to have a policy. Yeah. Director, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, I echo the sentiments. I think one thing might be helpful just for council, for our purposes and for not just ours, but all boards and commission, what the expectations are. We went in this as a consent item, so there was, from the onset, at least the perception, it wouldn't be a conversation, but it was pulled into action, and then we had to split the time that was limited. I tried to yield some of my time, but I know that it wasn't sufficient to get all the points in, so. I also recognize from our office perspective, there was a companion report that we submitted. It was our intent not to overshadow what the board's work, but we did believe that in this particular instance, that there were a lot of gaps this exposed, this event. From all levels of City Hall, and I think it's important for council to recognize that the emphasis was on the text messages, but we had procedural missteps that I think impacted the perception that we were gonna have an objective investigation. I mean, and we referenced it in our report from the city manager's office telling council, in essence, nothing to see here, go ahead and appoint a chief. I think that was inappropriate for many different reasons, and why we outlined it in the companion report, but we still had that vulnerability. I mean, you know, just because the city manager changes doesn't mean that if we don't have a positive practice, we might be in the same situation, God forbid another scandal happens. So I think council needs to recognize that, whether it be at the next submission or wherever, but at some point there were other issues that still need to be rectified. We still have the ongoing discussion about specialized units. When we were submitting the report, there was an important DOJ guidelines that came out about how to utilize specialized units. So one of the recommendations we did in that companion report, saying work with Arlo in that unit to really analyze what is going to be the scope and the appropriate practice of specialized police units within the city. So I think there's a lot of room for growth. And then one other thing I want to highlight, that we're not accredited, and there's an accreditation process. If you recall, last year we had a representative from Kalia, and Kalia was considered the gold standard of police accreditation. And what they do is essentially require the police to self-examine, and whatever they have in policy, that they're looking at it and auditing. Okay, you said you have a policy for this, when's the last time you updated it? At one point, I understand that the EPD was Kalia accredited. I wasn't able to get direct information why we're no longer accredited. But I think some of these longer systemic issues we have, if our body's not gonna get resources, accreditation may be an appropriate avenue. Hayward is a good example of what accreditation transparency could do, because they published their accreditation report and they say this is what from our review of internal policy. So again, there's got to be some way to ensure we have accountability mechanisms, because we can't obviously do all the work. The police can't do all the work. It might be important to tap into another resource.
Okay. Thanks both. Any comments, questions about our presentation at council? Next steps, seems like we're closing a chapter in this history right now, because our report to council is sort of the last thing on the radar, except for, you know, the follow-on policy proposals that we'll recommend as distinct items, but want to give anyone an opportunity to speak on it before moving on. Okay. In that case, thank you to everyone who, especially Board Member Calavita, for, you know, all your efforts in writing this report. Overseeing this, and, you know, and the director as well for overseeing the investigation as best as you could. I know it was a very long, arduous process, and hopefully we will be able to have something to show for it eventually. Okay. Next, without that, there's no action on that item, I don't think. Moving on to agenda item. Gosh, this is a big packet. 10D2, Fair and Impartial Policing Implementation Report. I guess this is also me. The Vice Chair, you reported last time on your conversation with Arlo, is that right?
Mhm.
Okay, so following on from that conversation, I asked the director and, Jose Analyst Murillo, whether the board gave me the authority to, submit a joint letter on its behalf, and, we reviewed the minutes and we did. So I'm actually doing this like, because I want your, take on the joint letter, and this is a draft, by the way. The joint letter is a draft, it's not something that the chief has agreed to. However, I will say that we drafted this joint letter based on conversations with the chief and, the proposals that were made during that conversation and conversations with Arlo. And so everything that is, we haven't made really many suggestions on this draft letter beyond what we talked about and sort of like came to, agreement about.
Was the concept of a draft of a joint letter?
That was my suggestion because,
No, but did the chief agree to that concept?
she said, send me a draft and I'll look at it.
Oh,
That was what she said.
okay.
So I don't have an answer for you on that. I thought that with respect to this item in particular, like a joint letter made sense because the public, just for context, there was, a lot of recommendation or like, recommendations and directives that the city council made back in, 2020, 2021. And we were tasked with overseeing the implementation of those recommendations. And here we are in 2025, sort of like closing out with some respect, some of those recommendations and asking the council, the subcommittee to formally end their reporting for a couple of them. And then telling the council essentially, so there's no action that needs to happen, but telling the council where us and BPD will be collaborating on a going forward basis and sort of signposting for them what we intend to accomplish in the next year. And so that's what this joint letter is intended to do, because the next Public Safety Committee meeting will be May 8th or May 3rd, actually. I can't remember, it's a Thursday. And they just adjusted it and they invited both the chief and I, or us, to come and speak. And I'm hoping that we can submit this joint letter to them as, our offering of how the department and us are working to collaborate on.
I think it's a great idea, doing a joint letter, because council's much more willing to agree to whatever is proposed if it's a joint proposal, so I applaud the concept.
Well, let me tell you, the reason I suggested a joint letter was because at our last presentation, the committee members only referenced BPD's letter. They didn't reference our letter, and so, this avoids that issue.
Chair, for the benefit of the new board members, could we just step back and say that the recommendations that the city council made back in 2019 or 2020, I guess it was, came from a mayor's working group on fair and impartial policing that was supposed to look at racial disparities in policing in Berkeley and make recommendations to council. And there were about, 15 recommendations to council. And it was presented to council as sort of an omnibus package, and council unanimously, those were different times, unanimously approved that package of reforms. And made the PRC at that time and the PAB the body that was to monitor and assess the department's implementation of all of those things. So it was a huge challenge for us. And who was on that committee with me?
Izzy.
No, I don't mean the working group. Oh. It was vice chair. To write our report. To write, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, it was a huge undertaking because the package was huge. And there had been quarterly reports from the chief on what they were doing. Anyway, that's sort of the background as to what this is about.
I mean, one of the recommendations of the 14 was to implement an effective early intervention system. And when I came on board in October 2023, BPD had been submitting quarterly updates saying that had been completed, but nothing had changed with respect to the early intervention system. And so, one of the first things that I do is point out to them, nothing has changed. Let's actually change something and actually implement the changes that council had asked for. And that's sort of at the beginning, we talked about I was a liaison for the early intervention system. And so we got council to actually allocate budget money, which is a necessary precondition to overhauling the system. And so that right now, a new system, which we negotiated over the course of the last year, is being implemented as we speak. And then we have a policy change that will accompany that once the the mechanics, the nuts and bolts are figured out. But that's like one example of a policy recommendation that was identified as complete, that was not actually complete, that we had to sort of like advocate for. And there's 13 others of those that we're trying to negotiate. And so, I mean, things around training, around like traffic enforcement, stop protocols. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to actually identify the ones that have been closed out, and then discuss with the chief what policies we need to work out in order to follow on this work that council put us on. But I think once we submit this joint letter, it'll sort of signal to the subcommittee and council that we're in a new era, again, from what the recommendation was. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what this letter is saying.
So you're asking, what are you asking, what's happening tonight vis-a-vis this?
There's a couple, I just want to know that we are aligned on the language in here before it's actually submitted.
I think that, I'm just like, in the interest of time, like I would love to move on, but what I will say is, and I think I've raised this with you before, to the extent that there are recommendations, I'm looking for the actual report that we submitted that are beyond the scope of the recommendations that were included in our FIP report. I'm not comfortable with that, at least not without articulating that these recommendations are beyond those or distinct from those.
Yes, you mentioned this one, the second one under.
Yeah, and I think the first one, I don't remember a recommendation that we be invited to participate in, observe the training. I'm unfortunately, I can't find.
No, you're right, it wasn't an explicit recommendation.
Yeah.
It
it wasn't our recommendation. I think your response was, well, it was in something that was presented to the mayor or from one of the things. So that's just like a process thing for me, is I think it's important that we go with what the council adopted, and then we go with what our actual recommendations were in terms of our follow-up, not use this as an opportunity to expand on those recommendations. So that's just my personal view. It sounds like you have the authority to submit the letter as you want to, so just giving my feedback.
Sure.
Or maybe it could clarify that these additional things
Yeah.
are agreed upon that were in addition to those explicit recommendations of report or something.
Oh, thanks for it. Is it in this packet?
No, it's not on the joint letter. She's talking about the original report.
Oh, you're just highlighting the letter, okay.
Okay.
I just had a question about, I'm not that familiar with the report, but the last thing about other FIP recommendations no longer provide quarterly updates.
Yeah,
So that was something that was in the report?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, they were giving quarterly updates as with respect to the implementation of the directives.
And so why are we saying that that's no longer required? I mean, have you already discussed that with the chief that?
Yeah, because the idea is like, they don't need to continuously report that they have a policy that says that they're handing out business cards. Like they don't have to.
It's a waste of time, and it also like unnecessarily adds to their quarterly updates, so it almost obfuscates the things that are not.
Yeah.
That recommendation was in the report.
I don't remember them providing quarterly updates on one of the searches of people on supervised release. I thought we had to go and manually figure out.
Oh, we did, but they provided updates. We figured out the numbers. But they provided an update on that on that recommendation, saying that they had implemented a revised policy, whatever they said they did.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Yeah, it goes to like the changes they made to the policy, not to like the number of people out there.
Yeah, well, I would like to see those numbers, actually.
Well, that's also something
I wish
that,
they would provide that.
well, it's something that Vice Chair Wilson was talking about with Carlo, and it's something that a follow-on conversation from this is like, the data that they have is raw data, and we're in discussions about who's gonna analyze and process that data and what data we want to publish. And so if you want data on that, then it's something that we have to gather into one report and ask the director and the chief to work out for us, but that's like a follow-on thing.
Has anybody ever seen on body worn camera footage the passing out of business cards?
no, and I think we put that in our original report, that we've never seen it,
Yeah,
but they say.
I mean, it's
they
one
do
thing
it.
to have a policy and another thing to actually implement. But. Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll take everything that was said under consideration when we talk. Hopefully I hear back from Chief Lewis soon. All right, moving on. It's getting late. Let's see where we're at. Gosh, this is a big packet.
I think we're public comment.
No, I think.
There's one more. Okay, yes. 10E, update discussion action on BPD's 2024 police equipment and community safety ordinance report. So my question is, we didn't publish in this agenda packet the chief's email, right?
No, we summarized.
Okay, I wish we had published the actual email this time.
Okay.
No, that's my fault.
What page is it on?
Yeah, it's on
It's on the
33
supplemental?
of the supplemental.
Okay.
I mean, like, I think that, Board Member Evans, if you want to read this, it gives good background. But I think what stuck out to me about the chief's response was that included in her response, which I don't think is in here, is that she kind of questioned the underlying authority that we have to request records pursuant to this review. And so I disagree with that for the reasons that are outlined in this memo, but also for the reasons that are in the charter. But she did offer an alternative, which is to for us, or for, who is it, Captain Oakins, to come and give a presentation on the specific controlled equipment that we requested data for. And just for like a little bit of background, this is like equipment that BPD is required to report on. It's whenever it's deployed or used. And so they provided us with a report of about 50 or so, maybe 60. And they have these elements that they're required to report on. And then we are tasked with approving that report and sending that approval to council. And we are actually tasked with identifying specific criteria. And in order to do that, our understanding is that we have to review the records that are associated with the items, the sample that we picked. And we picked a sample with a particular look to the LSDD and LRAD devices. That's on page 35 right here. And so Chief Lewis said that Captain Oakes could come and present on this in lieu of providing us with records that correspond with the individual items that we wanted to review. So I'm just curious what board members' takes is on that, and I haven't responded to her on that email thread, so I need to respond, and I'm hoping that we can have some sort of action on this tonight.
I just have a question. So our review of this report is governed by the Berkeley Municipal Code 2.100.0500, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that section refers to the standards articulated in 2.100.040.
Right.
Okay, but when I look at 2.100.040, So these are the criteria. The controlled equipment is needed and there is no practicably available alternative equipment. The proposed controlled equipment use policy will safeguard the public's welfare. The controlled equipment will not be used based on race, national origin, religion, sexual orientation. So my question is this. Do we or do we not believe that we have the ability to assess the report based on these 3 criteria absent the requested information from the department?
We discussed this at the last meeting, I think our answer was no, we don't.
So then, okay, so that's what I believe as well.
Yep.
So then, I think our action is not 1, 2, 3, or 4. I think our action is unable to review based on the department's decision not to provide the PAB with any data to enable us to comply with our responsibilities under the BMC. That's my.
We try to articulate that in 1B, but perhaps.
Yeah, but I think as you're using it as a rejection, I guess I'm just saying, maybe that technically is what we're doing. I just think what we're really saying is we can't do this. And so I think our message to council is, if you want us to do this, then you need to make it clear that the department has to give its data. In the alternative, you could change your Berkeley municipal code, but we don't do it. We can't do it under the circumstances that exist.
Yeah.
That's what because I don't think we can do this.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should pretend like we can.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Director.
Sure, one item that we did indicate, if you believe, that you have the right to use records, you do have the subpoena authority, and we included that there again, but this is one of those ongoing conversations about access to records, which we asked council to weigh in on. What is their interpretation of what records should be given to us for all these brands, for the broad authority that's been provided, and this is a very specific authority. So, as the vice chair said, if you believe that you need these records and you ask for them, you still potentially have the option to subpoena it. That would potentially gonna delay the process even more because the chief has indicated she still plans to take it to the council by a certain point. It was not our assessment for the office that the ordinance specifies when she needs to take it to council, but it was her interpretation that she needs to by a certain date.
What date was that?
I think her clock was almost like after the 60-day period. But our review was that it was sort of silent on it. It just needs to go to the PAB and then you need to get a certain time, but not that it needs to go to council at a certain date.
So are we convinced that if we get the data, we are capable of fulfilling that mandate?
It's a good question. Let me give you an
I
example.
mean, it's a pretty detailed
Yeah.
criteria that.
I mean, this goes back to, the conversation we had last time, I think, about, how we were gonna do a review if we were to get data. And I think what we decided was that we would review a sample. And so I think that 1B is, actually incorrect because we're not gonna independently verify each piece of controlled equipment complies with the approval. We were gonna take a sample, of the ones that we thought were important this year. And so if we had the body worn camera for the corresponding use that we had identified, we would, for example, be able to identify that there was no practically available alternative equipment.
And have you identified that sample to the department?
We did, we sent that to them.
Okay.
We sent the sample to them, it was for seven specific uses, and we said, give us the body worn camera so that we can evaluate these criteria that is set forward in the municipal code. And so we can actually recommend something to council about whether or not.
Okay.
we're
And she
compliant.
said that's too labor intensive to do that.
That wasn't her only response. Her response was like,
We didn't have the right to it.
that was a big part of it.
So I sort of agree with the vice chair that we should.
Then we
Our
can't do
report
it,
to
and
council should be, we cannot do it because the department is not good, because they need to hear individual instances where we cannot fulfill our function.
Yeah.
Because we're not getting the records.
But they don't want to provide it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also we may need to clarify that we were gonna undertake a sampling strategy anyway, that we can't do 100%, but here's the approach we were gonna take, we can't even do that.
Yeah.
I think that's our, okay, so do we need to vote on this?
Yes, and I would like to, for whatever we're formulating here, to essentially say something to the effect of, you know, we're putting the department and council on notice that when this comes to a head next year, we will subpoena the records well in advance of the report being filed before it does.
Yeah, we don't have to wait for the report.
Yeah. So, like, I don't think that using the subpoena power right now will accomplish the goals of reviewing this, because I think the chief is gonna submit it anyway. And so we can just point that out to council, that the chief is gonna submit it anyway, and we won't get the records in time no matter what.
I don't think you need to go into that kind of detail.
Okay. Anyway, sounds like we have some consensus around this.
Yeah,
Should we direct staff to draft it?
Can we get a vote on it?
Yeah, we're gonna vote.
Okay. In emergency.
have you made the motion?
I said, I asked someone else to retire. Oh, I can if I have.
Okay. So the motion is that we report to council that we will be unable to evaluate this controlled equipment report because the department has denied us access to the records that are required to fulfill that function.
I second that motion.
And that staff, we ask staff to prepare a memo, a short memo to that effect.
Yeah, short meaning like 3 pages max.
What,
Not even that long.
3 pages? I was gonna say 3 sentences.
More than 3 sentences. We need at least a little bit of procedural history in it.
All right.
Maybe like one to 2 pages.
Why are we dictating a page count for staff? I don't really understand.
Yeah,
We just think we don't want it to be long.
Sure.
No. I'm insisting on a short page count because
Why
I
don't
don't
we
want
have
15
2
pages.
pages, what am I gonna say in 2 pages?
It doesn't have to be 2 pages. I'm just saying a short page count.
Okay. 1 page.
If I may, I'm just trying to review when the chief, because it's indicated she's going to council, unless Adams, if you have that date.
The proposed council date is May 20th with a requested timeline for submission of any records being made first.
So the chief has to May 1st, that we get anything to him,
That's correct.
but it's going to council on May 25th. Is that what you just said?
May 20th.
May 20th. So you may or may not want to factor that in, that the chief is gonna submit something through the process on May 1st. You're not gonna meet here before May 1st, so if you want a memo to review as a body, it'll be at your next meeting after that, and it'll just go as a supplemental in the packet potentially. Is that correct procedurally?
That's correct.
Wait, so council is hearing it on May 20th, May 21st? When do we need to get it to someone by, in order for them to hear it simultaneously?
If it's gonna be May 20th, it's May 1st.
And we don't have a meeting before that?
That's correct.
Okay, well, then we should direct you to submit it after someone reviews it.
Yeah, your motion can include your reviewer.
Yeah, okay. I would like to review it.
Yes. Is that going to the chief as well, or directly to council?
She should be copied.
Copy the chief.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So the motion is to write a letter to council, that the board can complete the review of this report because it's been denied the records requested, to be able to do so. And then there is a friendly amendment to, essentially have the chair, staff draft it, the chair review it. And that was a motion by board member Calavita, seconded by board member Lovich. And then I'll proceed with the roll call. Board member Calavita,
Yes.
board member Evans,
Yes.
board member Lovich,
Yes.
board member Wilson,
Yes.
board member Wells,
Yes.
and Chair Grant.
Yes. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 11, public comment.
Okay. As a reminder, speakers are generally allowed up to 3 minutes, maybe allowed less time if there are many speakers. They may comment on any matter within the board's jurisdiction at this time, except confidential personnel matter. With that said, I'll start with those physically present before moving on to our virtual attendees. We don't have any community members currently here in the office, so we'll go ahead with our virtual public comment. Okay, I see one hand raised. Kit Aguilar, you've been granted permission to speak. One moment while I get the timer up on the screen. Okay.
Thank you very
Timer
much.
is up.
Thank you very much for taking my comment. In regards to the motion that you just made, I was going to suggest, but of course you just made the motion, that you say that not that you were unable, but that we were prevented from fulfilling your obligation in this because of that. But perhaps the accompanying letter might use the word prevent as being stronger than not. It's not an inability on your part. There's that. And then the concern I have about having a policy that allows the police to contact ICE and say, we want to ask you about this particular individual, thus giving ICE information about what individual they want to ask about. I understand that it may be complicated. I don't know if it would be possible to put a policy in place that if such a situation were arise in which BPD saw that it was necessary, that it would need to, ask the council in closed session to approve it or something of that nature. It seems to be a very unlikely, something that would very rarely occur, but it's almost certain to be a situation in the near future where for, we really don't want to be telling ICE much of anything. And I know that the general course in which policy gets made and put into place is slow. So when you're working on that sanctuary city issue, I think that's an issue that's really worth raising. And one more note, in regards to having a written policy versus general understandings. One of the things about having a written policy is if someone doesn't follow it, a complaint can be made. You really, really can't bring a complaint against an individual for not following general understanding. For one thing, the public has really no way of knowing what those general understandings are. And for secondly, you really can't show that someone didn't follow policy if there is no written policy. So I think it is really important to have things such as the concern about, encouraging officers to meet a quota of arrests in any informal form. That really does need to be a written policy. Thank you very much for your work. That's all for me.
At this time, is there any additional public comment from those attending virtually? Chair, there are no additional hands raised.
Okay, great. And that brings us to number 12, closed session.
Closed session, the webinar will be open, audio video recording will stop.
All right, let's recess for 2 minutes and then come back and get this going.
What do
The board heard updates on outstanding cases, but we took no action. And with that, I'll ask that someone move to adjourn.
So moved.
Great, thank you. Did I miss something?
Think so.
Did I miss something? Was it?